But yeah, it's very bizarre, the whole thing. So
We could do a whole interview
I
about
know,
that.
I know,
Phone book.
absolutely. But let's get into your life and your work. So thank you so much for taking a minute out. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to be here.
So let's begin our conversation. I know we kind of talked about calamity, but I think this was a bit, and we're getting kind of tired of the whole COVID thing. But if we look back on it, how did you get through that time period, and how did it subsequently change the way that you do your work now?
COVID was a complete transformation for me because that's when I became an entrepreneur. So, my career for 20 years was in broadcast journalism. I was a television reporter. I worked my way up from small town Ontario in Canada up to Ottawa, where I live right now, covering national politics. And then I left journalism in 2017, so a couple of years before COVID. And then I kind of bounced around in communications and ended up at a public affairs firm during when the pandemic hit. And, as someone who traveled the world with prime ministers, covered the biggest news events, traveled all over, sitting at a desk for 8 hours a day. At the time, I had a toddler and a just past toddler. And my whole world just completely changed. And I felt like I was chained to a desk. And I like to describe it as I felt creatively dead inside.
Yeah, yeah,
As someone who was a creative my whole life. And so I started to dabble in interior design. So I enrolled in an online program. Ultimately, it was a very business focused program. And for the first time in my life, I started to realize, I can be an entrepreneur. What if I try this? What if I do this? Well, life is short and all these stuff that we thought about, we were sitting at home, we couldn't get out. So I did that. I launched an interior design firm, which, a lot of it at that time was interesting with the masks and all of that.
yeah,
But I was able to, my boss at the time was very gracious and I went to part-time and I kind of did that on the side, did my studying and all that. One thing that was really interesting was I immediately started to use my broadcast and video skills to get myself out there, right? I had a big hill to climb. I was a nobody in a totally different industry. So I started doing Instagram. Eventually, when the lockdowns lifted, I got a spot on a morning TV show here in town. I got on stages at the home show, and my business grew really fast. And what happened with that was other entrepreneurs at the time, designers, but also even people who weren't in that industry were like, how do you do that? How are you so confident on camera? And I suddenly realized at that moment that what I was loving about being out on my own was that visibility part,
yeah,
that being out there and speaking passionately about what I was doing. And ultimately, it led to me launching a coaching program and now a business called Camera Confident, which I'm doing today. I still do design. I like to say on the side, but it's still very, very much of an active business. And now I'm an entrepreneur of two businesses. And none of that would have happened if it wasn't for COVID sticking me at home
yeah,
and really forcing me to look hard at my life and be like, what am I doing? Like,
yeah,
I was just over 40 and I was like, there's got to be more than this.
yeah. So what did you want to be when you were in the third grade, when you were young? What was your dream?
So, well, it's interesting. My very first ambition was to be strawberry shortcake. Um, so that was the first one.
Yeah,
My second one was my family and I traveled a lot when I was a kid, and there was one trip we took to Boston. And at the time, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles were really big. Maybe I'm dating myself. But there was a character on that show named April O'Neil, and she
yeah,
worked for Channel 6 News,
uh-huh.
and she always wore yellow. So I would always stand there with a microphone in family videos and say, "Hi, I'm April O'Neil from Channel 6 News," when I was, I don't know, maybe I was in third grade. So that was really my earliest ambition. And I think a big part of that was influenced by the fact that I come from a news junkie family. The news was always playing in my house. Every night we would have dinner and we would be watching the news, and it was always American news. And so I developed that from a very young age, and I always liked the spotlight. I always liked drama class, drama, drama. And yeah, so that was my earliest ambition. But then when I got into high school, there was a mentality of, well, you need to really excel at math and science, and And so I did that, and it just wasn't me. So I ended up really going to journalism school, and then studying also politics and economics. And that brought me to where I am today.
What was the first gig? What was the gig and the response that you got where you were like, this makes sense. All of these dreams of being in yellow and being a reporter and wanting to do this, when did it all become a real thing where it's like, all right, this is where I need to be in life?
Yeah, so it was a journey. I volunteered at a local community station, and it took me 2 hours on the bus to get there and 2 hours on the bus to get back. So I would go to this community station, 4 hour commute, and being there was the first time that I actually saw how television is made. I had worked in TV, but more in the promotions producing part. And so this was really an exciting, eye-opening experience. And I ended up on a whim sending an email to CBS News in New York. And I just said, I want to be an intern. And I was accepted into this program. So
Wow.
in the summer of 2001, right before 9/11, I was living in New York City and going to CBS News
Wow.
on West 57th Street, I think it is, every single day and being like, oh my God, like this is possible. Um, my start in the business, like my official first time I was on air and paid to do it, was in Windsor, Ontario, which is just across from Detroit. And I was a videographer. So I was doing it all, filming, editing, reporting, and I just kind of worked my way up from there. But it's a long journey, but for me, I also had a meteoric rise in news. I never stayed in one place for more than, you know, 2 years or so. And I think I started in 2005, and by 2009, I was a reporter in the nation's capital here in Ottawa.
So what was your ultimate dream in broadcasting? You go in, I know I have friends that are in journalism, and one time I was talking to a friend of mine that was publishing two newspapers in Iowa. And he was talking to all the presidential candidates from Hillary to Barack, all of them. And I was like, when are you going to go to the New York Times? When is this going to happen? And he just stopped me. And he was like, what are you talking about? I'm a small town. I want to do small town newspapers. And it just kind of threw me back because there's always this idea when we see reporters that they want to go as high as they can go. What was ultimately that dream for you as you ascended that journalistic ladder? What was your dream?
I always wanted to be a foreign correspondent.
Okay.
My dream was to live abroad, whether it was in London or Washington. I didn't want to be a war correspondent. That was kind of where I drew the line. And at the time that I was reporting in Ottawa, the war in Afghanistan was going on, and they were sending a lot of journalists there. I did end up going there once, but it was more on an overnight kind of stop on a press junket. So being a foreign correspondent was really my dream. But something interesting happened when I didn't get that job, but I got to fill in. And I remember I was filling in London in the UK for 2 weeks, and I realized what that job actually entailed in this day and age was sitting in a room, repackaging what came across from American networks and other networks, and then you would put your voice on that story and go out on the street, which in London you needed a permit to film on the street. So we could only like quickly hop out of the office, kind of stand behind the building, hope we didn't get in trouble, and then go back inside. And then you slapped your stand up, and that was it. Yes,
Yeah.
if you traveled to cover an event, then it was like what you would think it would be. But the
Yeah.
day to day was not what I thought it would be. And
Yeah.
then, unfortunately, those jobs have really dried up because media companies have lost lots of ad revenue as, the rise of social media and the digital revolution, really. And so news organizations, at least in Canada, are really not investing in those bureaus anymore. They're closing them.
Yeah.
And so when that disappeared, I really had to ask myself, well, what am I doing? Like,
Yeah.
why am I still here?
Yeah. So, who was a hero for you? Who's been somebody that you emulated, whether it's in the realm of broadcasting or otherwise, that inspired you with your on-camera persona and the way that you went about your journalistic integrity?
Oh yeah, so many. Well, one of my biggest mentors was Kevin Newman, who here in Canada is very well known as an anchor of, he was at all the different networks. He was also an anchor of Good Morning America
Yeah.
for a period. And I worked with him when I first moved to Ottawa. And I just remember pinching myself, being like, how did I end up in the same office as Kevin Newman? He has been one of the most incredible mentors to me. In fact, I have a podcast, Camera Confident, and I put out a call for people who wanted to be guests, and he was the first one to
Right on.
say, "Hey, I'd love to be a guest." And so we've continued a friendship even beyond, and I found he was always really supportive of journalists. There are also so many women who really blazed the trail before me. I looked up to a lot of female journalists, particularly in the States. Christiana Amanpour was a huge inspiration for
Yeah.
me just because, she traveled the world. I loved watching Anderson Cooper, and just a lot of anchors and reporters in the US were really an inspiration because when I first started, that was my goal. I wanted to eventually go down south of the border and report, but things have changed so
Yes.
much, that no longer was a priority for me, and that's where I really wanted to do the foreign corresponding.
What was the first interview that you had that was, whether it was really big or difficult, but you really learned a lot and it actually was a very engaging, good professional growth for you?
There are so many, and it wasn't necessarily the first, but there was one in particular where I was doing an investigation about electricity prices in my province of Ontario. And at the time, I was covering a story that not a lot of people were really talking about. And this is something that really shaped my career. I tended to gravitate towards stories that weren't like the big headline of the day. And I was trying to get an interview with the minister, the provincial minister at the time, and they were kind of dodging me as they tend to with controversial issues. And I ended up saying, okay, he was going to be at an event and they just agreed last minute. Yeah, yeah, he'll talk to you. So we sit down for the interview, and I don't think he knew what was coming because he was not prepared. And I
Yeah.
just roasted him. And and that interview, people were talking about it afterwards, and it ended up leading to a series of other events, and that really, I think, was one of those moments where it was like we call it in journalism a little bit of a gotcha interview.
Uh-huh.
So that was a really memorable one. But the most impactful interviews, I would say, were not with people in positions of power at all.
Yeah.
The most profound story I covered, which led to a change in government policy that really didn't make big splashy headlines. I mean, we certainly emphasized it on our network, was I covered a story about a veteran who had ALS. And he served in Iraq alongside a lot of American soldiers. And there was research out of the US that said that there was a link between military service and the development of ALS. And at the time in Canada, the benefits for veterans who developed this illness, like the link wasn't recognized, even though it was in the States.
Yeah.
So I did this really compelling interview with this veteran and his wife at the time. And um, they ended up changing the policy.
Wow.
I got a call from the Prime Minister's office that day or the next day, and they said, thank you for bringing this to our attention. This is going to change. And
Yeah.
as a result of that, and I don't know what the number would be today, but I remember following up and realizing that hundreds of families received benefits even after their loved ones had passed away because of that change in policy. They actually went and tracked them down
Wow.
and gave them that. And that veteran ended up passing away not long after that story. So that stayed with me. And that was why I got into journalism in the first place,
Yeah.
because those change so often we covered these really negative, horrible things, especially in the political realm. But it's really hard to get things to change.
Yep.
And when you zero in on something that is just so egregiously unjust and unfair and wrong, and let's face it, is not a politically charged issue, as that, like, no matter what political affiliation, that seemed unfair, right?
Yeah.
Um, so that's almost like one of those needle in a haystack outlier kind of things, but I
Yeah.
felt very fortunate to have been able to do that. So that was the most memorable and impactful interview that I would say I ever did.
And I think that's kind of the moral backbone that a lot of journalists have. I think about Jon Stewart. Of all of the things that he could do, he still gets in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee and he talks about all of those first responders that
Yeah.
inhaled all of that detritus from 9/11. And I think that's such a good function because reporters are almost like lawyers. You have to know a little bit about everything. You have to have your acumen up, and you're coming in from a position of strength because you're covering it, and you're doing it in a way that people they just don't know about it. But by
Mhm.
proxy, it can turn into something that is big, that legislation can get changed. And I think that's the reason why Benjamin Franklin in the beginning extolled the virtues of journalism, because there has to be checks and balances. You can't just go out into the world and do whatever you want to do because we're all human beings and we're affected by it.
But that is, I think, what's been eroded.
Yeah,
And as now a spectator of journalism, um, it definitely started while I was still doing it, but it's a totally different world now. And unfortunately, mainstream news organizations are no longer perceived as the gatekeepers of information.
yeah,
And a lot of people are turning to social media for their information. They're seeing a lot of misinformation. They're believing a lot of things. And on the opposite side, journalists are not being believed by people, um, and there's just even though, they're doing what they've always done, but now there's so much cynicism. There has also, to be fair, been a polarization of journalism, especially in the United States, but it's happening here in Canada too.
yeah,
And another thing I hear a lot, especially, from my vantage point now, is that, and I experience this as a journalist, there's this pack mentality that tends to happen where they're always everybody covers the same story, but all this other stuff doesn't
yep,
see the light of day.
yep,
And so I think, the the industry is in a transition, it's in a crisis. And I think people are also looking for hope. They're looking for positive things. So I
absolutely.
recently heard an interview with someone, I think he's in the States, and I can't remember his name, who's got a whole site now dedicated to good news and what's going on.
Yep,
And on YouTube, there's a creator named Cleo who, like, her stuff is blown up on YouTube
yep,
because she's taking a viewpoint of, well, look at all these cool things people are working on to make the world better. So I think
yep,
there's also a hunger
yep.
for that. And the adage in news has always been, if it bleeds, it leads. And people are tired of
I
the
know.
bleed. They
I
want
know.
something happy. They want to see that the world's not just falling apart. They want to see the bright things. And I think it's incumbent upon us as consumers and viewers to reward those who bring us some of that positivity.
Yep,
And I think we're doing that. We're voting with our views, with our likes, with our subscribes, right? To the things that move us. And I'm not saying that journalism, the the crisis in that industry is also because the people who run the show have not adapted with the times. They're not adapting with what audiences want in this day and age.
yep.
And, the chickens have come home to roost, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. Which I think is why podcasting is such a wondrous realm. There's so many good, unfiltered things that aren't driven by any kind of corporate entity. It's just people that can see eye to eye and expose the beauties of what we are doing on this planet. And we're just doing it because we want to do it. And because, growing up, there was two or three, four channels that you could watch, and it was
Yeah.
all just that was the information that you got. That was what was filtered. So I'm curious if you could interview one person on the planet right now, who would it be? Who would you love to interview?
Whew. Wow, that's a tough one. Um, there's a lot of different people I would want to interview, and my vantage point right now would not be a news figure at all. It would probably be someone in the realm of online business, of
Yeah,
digital business. People like Gary Vee,
yeah,
who's a huge figure in the online business space. There's people like, Ali Abdal on YouTube, who I really enjoy his content. Would love to, talk to him about how, yeah, I mean, he's documented this quite extensively on his channel. There are just so many creators who are really niche to what I'm doing right now that I would love to talk to. And I do interview on my podcast. I think I need to reach a bit higher and see if some of those folks will come and talk to me. But I couldn't name just one person
Okay.
because I'm someone who wants to talk to so many people, and every day there's somebody I come across and I'm like, wow, I'd love to sit down with
Yeah.
them. So those are just two that came to my mind, but
Yeah.
I could give you so many others. Amy Porterfield, she's
Yeah.
a fascinating person I would love to talk to. She's in the online course creator world. Um, and then of course, I could make lists in different niches, right?
Sure. Yeah, no, I totally get what you're saying. So, you've had a successful broadcast career. You've segued that into an entrepreneurship. What are you ultimately the proudest of when you look back on your career right now, which is obviously chugging in a different direction? But what are you ultimately the proudest of?
I'm the proudest of the fact that I have managed to take every single thing I've ever done in my career, from my early beginnings in promo producing and advertising to storytelling and journalism to executive communications to consulting to running a business. And now the business that is my primary focus is all of that now makes sense because every single one of those roles was a key piece of the puzzle to allow me to be the authority I am today in what I'm doing. And I think a lot of us kind of roll through careers and we're like, I'll take this job, I'll do this, I ultimately want to do this. And a lot of people are really lost. And I frankly expected, I'm in my 40s, that at this point I'd be like, what am I doing? I'd have some kind of midlife crisis and not know where I was going. And like, is this life? Is this all there is? And I have to say that I am the happiest I've ever been in my career right now because I'm in the driver's seat.
Yeah.
I'm no longer at the whim of someone who decides that my hair looks a certain way or my voice sounds a certain way, or I've gone and sat in the right office with the right person at the right time to get the right opportunity. I think my whole career I was waiting for other people to give me the opportunities because I worked hard enough. And I just thought that, if I just work a little harder, if I just
Right.
shine a little brighter, they'll see, they'll see. Well, they're gone.
Yeah.
And now it's me, and I'm able to, now I'm in a role where ultimately it's all about helping others and
Yeah.
inspiring others and bringing out the best in others. And for the first time in my career and in my life, I'm not so focused on what's next, what's in the future. Sure, I have goals and I'd love to, reach certain revenue thresholds and travel the world and speak. And like, there's things I want to do, but I no longer wake up every day thinking, I'll be happy when.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm truly happy now. There's things that obviously work-life balance is a challenge and all the stuff that comes with it. But that whole idea of waking up every day and I can't wait to get started. Like
Yeah.
I've never felt that until now.
Wow. So at the end of the day, everyone has had this perception of you, especially having a public persona, family, friends, and now clients and colleagues and everyone around you. But ultimately, you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Wow, that's a loaded
That's
question.
the therapy question.
Who do I wait? This is the therapy session? I thought it was a podcast interview. Who do I think I am? Well, I'm a mother. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm an educator who empowers other people to shine on video and discover the confidence within. I think a lot of my career up until now was about what I did, who I was, trying to get my name out there and my brand. And now, yes, that's obviously a key part of attracting clients and running my business. But the fulfillment that I get from lifting up other entrepreneurs and
Yeah.
showing them that they actually have this within them.
Yeah.
So I think I don't know if that answers the
It
question, but
does. It does. And this question can kind of bag a PhD dissertation, but it's usually the simplicity of things. You just get
Yeah.
to the marrow of who we are. It's perfect. So if anyone wants to hire you, they want to tune into your podcast, learn more about you, reach out, the good business, where do they go?
Well, I am really going hard on YouTube these days. So I have a YouTube channel called Be Camera Confident. I'm Shirley Engel on YouTube. We can link it below. I'm
Yes.
on LinkedIn, very active on LinkedIn, and cameraconfident.ca. So would love to connect with anyone who's inspired by this, who wants to talk, who's interested in elevating their video presence. The two platforms I'm really focusing on are YouTube and LinkedIn. I actually have a free 90-day challenge where we're just getting out there, putting videos on both platforms, teaching you how to kind of use them together. And one of the biggest things is I'm being totally transparent about it. I don't know everything. I'm learning as I go. And that's what I love about this day and age. It's like we're not putting on a facade, we're real. So come learn with me, and
Yep.
I'd love to get in touch.
This has been wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time. Thank you for going through your career and being gracious enough and giving us Americans just a little bit of needed therapy this morning. We probably just need to be heard and be receptive. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This has been a pleasure.
Absolutely.